Hello everyone, not for the first time in my life I find myself staring at a box wondering whether it's safe or even appropriate to take a look inside. On opening the box I'm a little confused as I distinctly remember an email promising a big plastic toy and some lubricant. Reaching for the lubricant I accidentally brushed against the softest, most sensual foam. It's as soft as the inside of, well, explaining to an audience whose hobby guarantees their permanent chastity would be rather cruel. While examining the lubricant I did discover the true purpose of the foam. The aperture was way too small, so I can only assume the package was meant for somebody else. Perhaps I should send him the piece I cut out. Still slightly adrift as to how it all goes together, I connected to the interweb and contacted the online help chat address that comes in the box. Despite my initial confusion, after a brief chat with their friendly and efficient customer support agent, everything was made clear. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the video where I take a look at the A10C UFC from Buddyfox Simulations, not Bondage, Fetish and Sex Toys Limited. You can't have a montage without music, so here's a little ditty I recorded for an art house movie. It's called Cum Shot Cascade. My first impression is quality. The buttons are all raised and shaped identically to the ones found in the A10C. It's not something you can just lay on a desk, so you are going to have to incorporate it into your setup, just like I did by adding an extension to my extremely stylish homemade stick mount. It has a bit of weight to it, so it'll need to be secured, and as my grandfather Lauby the First used to say, you can kill your way out of most problems, but for everything else there's Velcro. There's a handy cable channel in the back that keeps everything neat, tidy and flush. You'll have to excuse my nervousness here, but it is the first time I've ever mounted anything on camera. With everything connected and as secure as it's ever going to be on that mount, it's time to twist my knob to see if it lights up. I can't emphasize enough the build quality. If you listen to the next segment, you'll hear the satisfying click produced by each button. If you'd like the master caution button to flash in sync with the game, you're going to need to download and use a little bit of software called Raygun. You'll also need to add a couple of Lua fans, but it's not mandatory and only necessary for that particular feature. Because at its heart it's a button box, setting up in DCS is an absolute piece of piss, so I'm not going to show you how to do it. I will add that DCS is the easiest game to set up controls in, so if you do need help setting up controls in DCS, may I suggest you fuck off over to Amazon and buy a colouring book and some crayons. Oh, and do try not to eat them all in one sitting. As you can see, after a 3-minute setup, it works perfectly well with the aircraft it was designed for, the A10C. It being just a button box at its heart lends a versatility that makes it easy to set up with super realistic aircraft like the F18C or F14B, and even fantasy aircraft like the Harrier. I'll be perfectly honest with you here, because I spend about 50% of my time in VWar, I wasn't quite sure how this would fit into my setup. I had never really given it any serious thought before. It's kind of like you're walking down the street minding your own business, and some guy walks up and offers you a blowjob. You refuse because you're straight, but then he puts ice cubes in his mouth. As I was working through all my pre-flight parameters in the A10C, I began to appreciate the utility of the gadget. Previously I hadn't thought that having a physical manifestation of the object would make all that much of a difference. But after a few minutes use I began to notice I wasn't suffering from nearly as much of that cognitive pause that one seems to suffer when using a mouse, wheeling it in circles looking for the correct button. As a result of this, the speed with which I could cycle through parameters, enter parameters, cycle through waypoints, weapons and other bits and bobs was drastically increased. It was also rather nice having something to touch, well, something else to touch. At this point I have to hark back to the build quality that I mentioned in passing earlier on in the video. These guys aren't fucking around, they've come with the ice cubes. Apart from the box itself being heavy and solidly constructed, and if you follow the wise words of Boris the Blade you'll know heavy is good. The buttons themselves are really solid, nice to the touch and made from a kind of hard rubberized material. Because of the way they're set and the position of the switches there's no danger of them getting jammed in. Oh, and there's that master caution sync. Having discovered how easy it was to use, and more importantly how easy it was to get used to using in the A10C, I wanted to try it out on an aircraft that I spend a lot more time flying around in. Obviously the UFC differ between aircraft, but I tend to spend a lot more flight time interfacing with the UFC and the F18 than I do in the A10C. One of the tasks I'm sure many of you are familiar with the F18 is entering waypoints via the UFC, and I found this task a lot easier than using the mouse. Furthermore, because we've all grown up using keypads, whether it's your phone or remote control for your TV, or the secret room you keep your guns, runaways or sex toys in, using the Buddyfox feels far more intuitive than using a mouse. This is obviously going to be very useful for some of you who use multiplayer servers where you're going to have to set up a lot of your own waypoints, but it's also very useful in single player where you have to set bomb parameters on the fly. I also found it extremely functional with the little experiment I did with the Rio keypad in the F14. While extremely impressed, I was still left with my VWar Dilemma. Then it hit me, what do blind people do? Well, they seem to love sunglasses, golden retrievers and labradors. But they seem to harbour some kind of petty irrational prejudice against other breeds, which is quite disgusting in my book. They're also not very interested in flying aircraft, but they love these things, all the way from Xi Jinping's Euro discount store to you, my VWar solution. We'll jump back into the A10C while I gather my final thoughts and try to wrap up the video. Before I do, I'd like to thank Veal from Buddy Fox Simulations for putting this on my radar and giving me the opportunity to try it out. I would also like to commend him on his bravery in sending me a package and asking me to be totally honest about the contents. As it turns out, Veal's decision was based on confidence in a good product rather than reckless bravery. It's well designed, made with good components and robust. But to me, what separates a great product from a good product is a great product will integrate itself into a task to such a level that you'll wonder how you managed previously. And the Buddy Fox A10C UFC certainly ticks this box. Before we wrap up, let's take a look at the price. It works out at 112 shekels, excluding tax and delivery. Everyone knows flight sim peripherals can be quite expensive, but for a well-made and designed product such as this, it's actually quite cheap. Let's be honest here, 112 shekels is not a lot of money for something you're going to use for years. I've paid more than that for a Hummer, and twice that if they put ice cubes in their mouth.